say roll another smoke up. Yeah, ghetto politic, blowing up like metal hollow tip. Street scholar on a school of hard knocks, scholarship raising hell, twisting blunts up and blazing L's. Paper swells, burning more herb than ancient spells. Hold it Dutch like Ghostface on some Cobra clutch. You know it's us from the smoke blowing out the bus. Herb hustler, cannabis I sold enough. Sticky green, purple haze, white widow rolled and puff. For the kids pull their hands from leaf toes who tried to blind their sight with haze from weed smoke. Drain the free, throw your lights on the line. If you break this shot, you won't survive for your time. I'ma rise like the crime, but still rhyming at will. Still climbing, trying to find the other side of the hill. Cyphers I kill, cause with skills I'm still at it. And it ain't hard to tell like Nas or Illmatic. Yeah, I rock mics like addicts rock pipes. Every bar I drop is wrapped up locked tight. We underground, outshine the spotlight. In your face like house flies on a hot night. Through the speaker, my voice hits like a bomb blast. Lift you off your feet like some Afghan blonde hash. It's the 8-ball cannonball projector, chewing through your squad like I'm Hannibal Lecter. Yeah. This world is flipped, turned upside down. Dice is snake eyes, man, your luck ran out. Put my voice on the track, you turn up my sound. Yo, you tough guys should've given up by now. A lot claim to be kings, but I don't see no crowd. Just fake Montanas, Frank Whites, and Nino Browns. There's no peace allowed, just beefs and cows, reefer clouds. Got these whack rappers below ground. Yo, it's no prop, yo, catch the brass knuckle nose jobs. Full clips from my lips, dead your whole squad flows high. Can burn a hole in the sun, nowhere to run. You roasting hell, soaking in blood. Say hola, hola, hola.
Hoods up, motherfuckers. Welcome back to Black Hoodie Alchemy. As always, I am your host, Anthony Tyler. And I am sitting here with the cohort, the homie, Mr. Chris Fiato, odd combo himself. We have a chair upturned for Mr. Seed Person. He's not dead. He is just on hiatus right now, and he will be back before too long. He's doing well, making a lot of progress, doing some updates in life.
That thing some men call failure, I call breakfast. And I'm not leaving till I've cleaned out the buffet.
Here on the show today, we are talking about vampires. But before we get into that, I do have some fun announcements. Nothing too crazy. But aside from the basics, like check out the show notes. You can go get my books, especially since I think it's safe enough into fall to be, we could talk about Halloween openly. And my book Hunt Manual is, if you are looking for thoughtful material that's not like about Halloween, but completely Halloween centric, go check that out. It's not in audiobook yet, although Dive Manual is, but you can get it. The Amazon has one of those deals where, like, if you sign up for Kindle, you can get that book for free, or like 99 cents or something. It's very cheap, and there's easy ways to get it. So, and you can also, I have a couple episodes, something like serial killers, cult leaders, and the Jungian perspective, parts 1 and 2. And that is literally reading chapters of that book. So you can go listen to those episodes. For Halloween coming up, we don't have a date yet, but it will be by Halloween. Miguel Connor and I'm going back on Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio for our annual Halloween special. We didn't do that last year because of scheduling stuff on both our parts, but for like the last 3 years we had done it, and we are coming back around, coming in hot for this Halloween season, so you can keep your eyes peeled for that. I feel like I can comfortably kind of give you a little bit of a teaser roadmap for some topics that we have coming up. I am very much interested in talking about the Paris catacombs at some point soon. I've got some notes building for that, and so that will be Paris catacombs and other subterranean cities, tunnel structures. Catacombs is mostly the term for burials, but colloquially it's kind of just become the term for like all these vast underground networks. And I think we're going to talk about werewolves at some point for this Halloween season as well. So very much excited about that. And when we get further on into the more family oriented holiday season, I think rainbow body, Tibetan rainbow body, and that whole Buddhist, sort of like a comparison in some ways to, what do you call it, stigmata, these these anomalous religious physical wounds, the manifestations that come from the religious experience, um, allegedly. And there's a lot of interesting stuff there if you're not familiar with that. So I think that will be super weird and eerie, but not overtly, horrifying, like something like vampires. So that'll be good going on further into the holidays. And there's going to be some other stuff as well. I don't think we're going to do too many guests for the rest of this year. I've got some more transition going on, and I bet you people like Joe Roop and Justin Otto will still be in the mix. I think we will be getting Eric Millar and Keats Ross back on because they're sort of integrated into the inner circle. It's easy for me to network with them, and they've had some new stuff release. I would like to get Ronnie Pontiac back on. He will be at some point, hopefully this year. But I have a feeling that a lot of the guest stuff, in terms of people coming on this show, a lot of that will start happening again with the new year. So we'll see. And I think that's about it. So thanks for tuning in. Good to see you again, proverbially. Chris, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing really well. Those are some exciting announcements for what you got planned coming up. But yeah, we're having a great day. Just, turned 34 last night, so I'm really excited for the future. Feeling good today.
Well, yeah, man. Happy birthday. I'm
Thank
glad.
you.
Yeah, I'm glad that was a positive birthday for you. And yeah, anyway, so we're enough teaser, enough talk about other shit. Vampires. Let's get into it. We're deep enough into fall. We could talk about the Halloween season. This is pretty much like our Christmas here on Black Hoodie Alchemy. Um, we are all in our own way little goth kids, one way or the other. Whether you're like me and I had the leather wallet and the giant biker chain and the eyebrow piercing and the Slayer t-shirts in high school, or you had some more face paint on, or maybe some what do you call them? Some platforms, or there's all sorts of goth emo, but all of that, that whole brooding teenager, even brooding young adult, some don't really grow out of it. And hey, no judgment there. We will actually be talking about the people who don't really grow out of it. The human vampire thing, especially in New Orleans, is a fascinating subculture. And it's not something I can completely relate to, but in that whole overarching brooding person sense, I most certainly can. That's that's part of the Black Hoodie Alchemy vibe. And I've come out of my shell a lot over the years. A lot of that thanks to, alchemy, quite frankly. And that said, I always, hence the dark interests and things on the show. I think once you spend enough time in those brooding places, some of that, just inevitably rubs off on you. And I think, part of the alchemical mindset is you can't delete your neural pathways, but you can rewire them, you can reroute them, and using darker, maybe even more brooding behavioral patterns for positive things, like art just being super easy, strong example. That's a way of channeling something for the better. And the human vampire culture has a lot to do with that general mindset of channeling something for the better. The We're gonna save the dive into that for further on in the episode, but suffice it to say, they're definitely not bad people. They're not, like abducting people and drinking their blood if they consider themselves regular human vampires. It's more like a less a a less heavy metal version of like Anton LaVey Satanism in some ways. And yes, a lot of them do drink blood from you know uh, consenting partners, but that's not a prerequisite either for vampirism in real life. And honestly, the takeaway I get from it, and I say this with love, is the human vampire strikes me as, like a goth theater kid. You know, someone who was like really into Glee Club and then maybe also got really into heroin with a friend and like watched someone OD, and then like fucking like the next thing you get into after that is like Anne Rice, right? And you still have that like theatrical pageantry, which just seems to be so strong running in human vampire culture and vampire lore and fiction. Anne Rice, you know, big example there. I'm sure we'll be bringing her name up more and more throughout the episode. So there's, it's interesting that that is a strong running theme where there's, you know, it's the count, the lord, the like almost the corrupted nobleman in a way, and so there's that lording sense and that almost like eclectic millionaire kind of vibe to it, and then, so there's just a lot of pageantry involved, and you know what, I think that's fun. I think that's fun. That's not, I go more to the mosh pit than I do that vein of the general brooding aesthetic, but I get it. I get the appeal, and I read Interview with the Vampire and The Vampire Lestat back in the day in high school, and I really liked them. I hear Anne Rice kind of tapers off the further she gets into her career, and the further she makes peace with her inner demons, is how most people who are fans of hers put it. They say she just got more easygoing, and she lost the bite in her fiction, pun intended. And but good stuff, and a great movie, still holds up. I hear there's a new Interview with the Vampire series. I don't know. It's ongoing, so it must be good enough, but I don't know the first thing about it. I'm I'm less willing to take a gamble on series than I am movies. But so here, before we get more into vampire lore, since it's inevitable and it's actually part of the conversation, the vampire fiction, let's take a moment. Chris and I, we're gonna just vomit out some of our favorite vampire fiction. And Chris, I invite you to go first. We've had this conversation a little bit amongst ourselves, but happy to hear more. And you know, certainly the listeners haven't been involved, and this really is a part of picking apart the vampire symbolism. So give me both
Yeah.
barrels.
One of my favorite vampire series is actually, it's a book trilogy by Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan, but they turned it into a 4-season series called The Strain.
Yeah, I
And
gotta check this one out. I haven't yet though.
yeah, I fucking really loved it. I'm a huge Guillermo del Toro fan, but
Hell yeah.
just the premise of it is very, I know I was saying this to you, in my opinion, it's kind of the most uh one of the more grounded depictions of in the lores of the the vampire lore, but they use it's like an actual like parasitic worm that infects these people. It's very, reminds me of like the archons kind of.
Mm.
But yeah, that's one of my fucking favorite series. I haven't watched it in a long time. Would love to go back and check that out. um Daybreakers is a fucking cool one. That's a
Yeah,
movie.
Ethan Hawke. Yeah, the whole, almost like a Blade Runner society, like flying cars and shit, and vampires are the dominant species,
Yep.
and humans are used as like cattle and things like that. And the first half of that movie was fucking rad, and the second half was not terrible, but super cliche and underwhelming. And with how cool the first half was, kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. So I only watched that one once, but it left a huge impression on me, like aesthetically. I thought it was fucking cool.
Yeah,
Um,
you made the Blade Runner comparison is very apt. It's very futuristic, kind of cyberpunky,
yeah,
noir almost.
Ethan Hawke and Willem Dafoe do great jobs as always.
Yeah, yeah. Ethan Hawke kind of seems like a tool in real life, but he's a great actor. Willem Dafoe, I enjoy him. He's a fucking trip. And I'm drawing a
Absolutely.
blank on other vampire. I mean, I'm really looking forward to was it Roger Eggers' version of Nosferatu that's coming out with Bill Skarsgård.
Oh wow, I've heard whispers of that. Yeah, that'll be
Yeah, it's
interesting.
supposed to come. I think it's supposed to come out this Halloween season.
Oh wow.
Uh,
Okay, right on.
but yeah, I mean, even the original Nosferatu is that's one of the creepiest depictions of a vampire, in my opinion. And there's some really interesting lore attached to the making of the original Nosferatu, and some people, I think they even made a movie about it. Some people speculate that the guy who played Nosferatu was an actual vampire. I think his name was Max Schreck.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
remember the name of it. It might be Shadow of the Vampire, but it is a
yeah,
movie with John Malkovich. Yeah,
Willem Dafoe's in
and
it too,
Willem
right?
Dafoe. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay, and one quick side tangent to the Nosferatu looking vampire. When I was like 4 years old, uh, there's an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark that takes place in a movie theater, and they're watching a Nosferatu type of ripoff movie, and the vampire comes out of the movie screen, and I was watching it with my sister and my neighbor, and they fucking ran upstairs and locked me in the basement. And they're like, Nosferatu's coming to get you. I fucking pissed my pants. And
Oh man.
I've always had uh, a strong affinity, but also a physical aversion to the look of Nosferatu. Scares the shit out of me.
I get that. I get that. I can feel it myself, but the one that I have a strong childhood reaction to is Pazuzu in The Exorcism. I don't even remember how I saw that. But I feel like this is a recurring theme, just part of the weird mystique of that movie is a lot of people somehow randomly saw Pazuzu as kids. Like, when the face comes out of the dark and it's in that clownish makeup and you're like, oh my
Yeah, it's
God,
that quick,
didn't
like
need that.
subliminal flash.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Didn't need that. Thanks though.
I, I think that quick view of it makes it even more haunting because you're like, did
Yeah.
I just fuck? Did I
hmm
actually just see that?
Other vampire lore I brought up Interview with the Vampire. I definitely got to bring up I Am Legend. Richard Matheson is the horror fiction goat, in my opinion. If you don't know who he is, he's written great works like the book A Stir of Echoes, which became a Kevin Bacon movie that was slept on because it came out right around the same time as The Sixth Sense, and it had to do with seeing dead people. But that's a good movie, better book even. He wrote books like Hell House, which is a good one. The Incredible Shrinking Man. More notable names that you might know, like What Dreams May Come, which is a fascinating comparative religious, like speculative fiction piece. And then, of course, I Am Legend. And he also wrote Twilight Zone episodes. So Richard Matheson was a fucking badass. He inspired people like Stephen King. So you can't not respect Richard Matheson, really. And I Am Legend, if you are only familiar with the movie, I'll briefly go into this because it is fucking great. And this is definitely my biggest tie to vampire lore in general. Um, and it really had an influence on me as a human being, and the whole concept of the surviving the plague, influence zombie literature and just like the whole post-apocalyptic virus, like non-radiation kind of sect of that fiction, it all largely inspired by I Am Legend. And the whole idea of Robert Neville slowly losing his mind. He's just an ordinary person. He doesn't know why he even survived. And he's being tormented by these vampires coming and, throwing rocks and heckling him outside his house every night. And some of these vampires are sentient and still very aware, and some of them are basically like reanimated dead. And to keep from losing his mind, he starts going to the library to try and figure out what is going on. And he lives in a I can't remember where, but like a big city. So he's got like a big library too. Because this is like the 50s as well, so that definitely counts for something. No internet, even if you somehow manage to like get it back online or something like that. And he starts figuring out, long story short, that the vampire disease is a bacillus bacteria that is something similar to like the bubonic plague. And there's all sorts of interesting scientific explanations that he comes across for garlic and things like that. And um in fact, the cross, he refers to it as like a quote unquote hysterical blindness. And since vampire lore has become so well trod in our psyches, that when these people themselves become something that is essentially the real life vampire, quote unquote, they become susceptible to these. They react the way, and they're in altered states of consciousness, of course, as well, and so they react the way they would expect to be that they should react, which is a very human thing. Like there's a lot of examples of that in psychology, but so there's more you could say about I Am Legend. Great book, and the way that Robert Neville and Richard Matheson goes into investigating occult history, basically, to come up with practical explanations for the vampire, influenced me, just in terms of my outlook in general. And that also, rounding home plate here before we get into some more meaty subject matter, the whole circulating vampire lore that Neil Blomkamp talked about with his partner. I don't remember his co-worker creator's name there, but he talked about this on the Joe Rogan Experience. And Chris and I both were kind of the opinion, like, old school Joe Rogan, we enjoyed it for what it was, and it is fruit that's rotted on the vine a long time ago. But you can still check out interesting clips here and there, most certainly. And this one was definitely a fascinating clip where they talk about this real speculative fiction evolutionary angle to the vampire. It has to do with a super predator. It's like a subspecies of the like us as a freaking Homo sapien. And I had to think about that one for a second. And the idea that the predator meant for culling, like the lion to the gazelle, culling the natural population. There's much less of the lion to the gazelle, and because of that, they are making them the apex predator. They're far more intelligent. They're far much stronger, and just more capable of being predators. So, and by applying that to vampire lore, you get a really practical explanation. Like, essentially, yeah, how it comes across is, if vampires were real, this is most certainly how they would be. And so in the practical follow through, they're basically like serial killers that are extremely agile, like athletes with the brain of like a astrophysicist. And they go into hibernation, and they wake up every so often, building to the sense of lore, and where they feel like they're more immediate in some periods in culture and not in others. And then when the population gets big enough, they come out and cull it more. And the only other thing I want to add to that is really cool explanation for the
Cross.
the crucifixes, the crosses. The their super predator brains developed throughout history, and most of evolutionary history, long before we developed Euclidean geometry, essentially, and the right angle and all the structures we find in our cities, but also cathedrals, which is where all that comes from, really, and crucifixes. And when you show, not only can the vampires in this lore not really adapt in cities very well, but when you show them a crucifix, the right angles fuck with their eyeballs and their neural processing, and sends them into like a grand mal seizure, which is fucking just, that is great speculative fiction. That is super, super fascinating.
Yeah, I thought that shit was so cool. And the I'm drawing a fucking blank. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Also, the fact he was saying too that there's such a vast apex predator and so intelligent, they can carry the equivalent of like 4 or 5 of our consciousness at once in
Oh,
their
right.
mind. And there was something else I was gonna add, but I'm drawing a fucking blank.
Well, don't worry about it. There's a lot swirling around in both our heads with such a vast topic. So if it comes
Yeah,
back to you,
it was that the reason they misinterpret the cross is because their eye slits are vertical too, I believe he said.
oh
So
yeah, there
the
was something
right
about
angles,
that.
yeah. I thought that shit was. I really hope he makes that into a movie because that would be that would be fucking phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah. And if you've listened to the recent episode drops, you're probably familiar. We've talked about District 9 a little bit. Um, I watched it recently, and Neil Blomkamp is the dude who District 9, he not only directed it, but it was his total brainchild. But yeah, he wrote and produced that and all that jazz. So I think I might go into some true crime-ish vampire lore here. But before I do that, I want to just give a salute to Mary McFadden. I came across a fascinating peer-reviewed psychological paper analysis done by her. Is recent, within the last few years or so, and the title is A History of Vampires and Their Transformation from Solely Monsters to Monstrous, Tragic, and Romantic Figures. And it is literally a Jungian analysis of vampire lore. So we are going to really stretch our legs with that one, because I couldn't put some of these things better myself, and there's a lot of interesting points in there. So, but I think before we do that, let's just go into some crazy modern day quote unquote vampire lore, and let our imaginations run wild for a moment, and then let's bring ourselves back down. So, if part of the reason that we decided to do this, and it worked well with the Halloween season, so we pulled the trigger, is voodoo. We stopped by New Orleans, proverbially, quite a bit with our voodoo research, and that even carried over a little bit in concept with Santa Muerte. So, and vampire culture, I mean, there are very few places where you can just very easily and without any pushback use the term vampire culture, and New Orleans is one of those places. There's a few others. In fact, we'll come across it here in the notes. Like I think New York City, which is not hard to believe, and some other places are vampire culture hubs, but New Orleans is front and center, and it has. I I I I bet you the more you become ingratiated with locals, the more the off the beaten path vampire stories you can find. But in terms of just looking at the lore that has shaped New Orleans vampire lore, and therefore shaped American vampire lore, is there's a few basic stories, and one is fun, but it kind of came across lazy to me. We're not going to get too deep into this character because he will serve as his own episode one day eventually. I mean, that might even be a good like December episode or something like that. The Count of Saint Germain, and the mysterious immortal alchemist throughout history, who some people saw even into the 1900s, and he was born in the late 1600s. Very mysterious person. We know he was a real person, but either this dude was just a absolute master at building his own lore, like cult leader level master, but used it for more fun, less nefarious purposes, and just became a man of mystery and legend instead of manipulating a shitload of people. It's either that or he had some sort of power, like, because he is all over esoteric Western lore, and he's one of those dudes that is just bigger than it's hard to separate his historical character from the legend. In fact, you really can't completely, and that is the magic in how someone becomes larger than life right there. So he definitely was well studied one way or the other, and he is incorporated into New Orleans vampire lore. That's right, kind of lazy if you're very familiar with alchemical philosophy, because he was definitely not a vampire in no places in history except for New Orleans lore is he considered a vampire whatsoever. He's not considered to have drank blood or sacrificed people. And so I guess they just took but he did spend time in New Orleans. So New Orleans people, I'm a huge fan of New Orleans. I really like hanging out there and I like the culture, but you guys really phoned it in on this one. This is something that's incorporated into like their tours and stuff. And I guess they were just like, oh, this guy was an alchemist, and alchemists were into the dark arts sometimes. Like that's basically like vampires. So let's just trade alchemist for vampire and call it good. And it has remained a strong fixture ever since. So that's kind of sad. Get your shit together, New Orleans. Um, there's some slightly better stories, but um, and part of explaining these stories, we will get into the investigation a little bit. But I will say right out the gate that in contrast to something like the voodoo zombie, where we can find a surprising amount of practical history, that it demystifies it a little bit, but it's really mind-blowing like how practical some of the explanations are. We don't find this in New Orleans vampire lore. It's very highfalutin, undocumented, but cool stories, right? So here's one about the Carter brothers. And these guys, caught in 1932 in New Orleans. The French Quarter in New Orleans is the home of the vampires, and of course, they were hanging out around here in, I think, like 1800s in New Orleans in Interview with the Vampire. So that cool to see that filmed. That is part of what makes that movie so awesome. I really enjoy that. But and they're drawing off of genuine real life inspirations in terms of the aesthetic. So these Carter brothers were basically serial killers, quote unquote, but we'll explain why that's specifically in quotations there. Caught in 1932, there was a distressed young girl, woman rushing down Royal Street, and there is today there's what's called the Vampire Cafe in New Orleans, and they will sell you sangria in blood bags, in IV bags, and it's a fun little shop. I really wanted to get one of those blood bags, but sangria just doesn't sit well with me. It's too sugary, and it kind of, especially in the heat like that, it's no bueno. But I like the idea, and it's apparently right across from the story where this story takes place. And I didn't know that at the time, but I can picture it in my head now. And long story short, these Carter brothers, the police went to this warehouse across the street from where this vampire cafe is today, and found people who were kept like cattle in there. They were all bandaged up with fresh wounds, but they weren't dead. And supposedly these two Carter brothers were literal vampires, and of the like immortal supernatural variety, and they were keeping people in this warehouse and almost like fucking like Richard Kuklinski Gemini Lounge style, like draining people out, except they were drinking that blood and not disposing of bodies. And since this is folklore, it goes different ways in terms of, suppose, I guess these Carter brothers would eventually kill people because they just drain them until they were dead and then dispose of the bodies, but no bodies were ever found attached to them. In the story, when police come in, they find no dead bodies. They definitely find tortured people, but they're all alive. The Carter brothers aren't there, but there's a sting that excuse me, there's a sting that happens, and there's a chase. Police end up shooting them down, and in some stories I think they get away, but in most of the stories they are shot down, and then they are put in what do you call it? The mausoleum, right? The above ground, um,
Yep.
yeah, cemetery burial situation, and that is really standard practice in New Orleans, which actually helps lend to the vampire lore. You're not buried underground, easy access for these, undead immortals. And so, and also you add extra people into the mausoleums sometimes. So when they went to add people into the Carter brothers mausoleum later, they were not there. And that's as the story goes. There's one more story, but let me read this article here. This is by Courtney Maroc. And I'm reading this on hauntjaunts.net. I thought this was a really, really great deep dive. I couldn't have put it better myself. This is entitled "How DeathPenaltyUSA.org Helped Debunk a New Orleans Vampire Tale." So there's let's see. I'll read a little bit of this before they get into their death penalty analysis, .org analysis. Other details should have helped corroborate the short story. For instance, the names of the serial killers, John and Wayne Carter. Allegedly, they confessed to being vampires, needing to drink blood, and warned they'd kill again if released. Okay, so they were captured and put to death. Is how the story goes. Right, because of death penalty and all that. Right, of course. So good to get that straight there. Um, so I pressed on with my research because even though the article said it was a forgotten story, it was sensational. You'd think something like this would have definitely hit the papers, but I couldn't find any mention of it at all, which was suspicious for haunt jaunts in general, but especially while researching stories for their series that they put on the website. What is it? Haunting American True Crimes. So salute to that. One thing that quickly became apparent was that papers love sensational, weird, and wild stories. And that's as true as it was now as it was back then. And that is a really good point to make. You should always, just because people remember the story in the telephone game, like it's a pretty clear red flag when there's no documentation of it at all. So these people should be in death penalty records. This person went to deathpenaltyusa.org and checked out the index of Louisiana executions from 1911 to 1961. But the only Carters the researcher, could find that had been put to death in Louisiana was a man named Samson Carter in 1933 and Herman Carter in 1943. Maybe some of the dates were wrong. Maybe the vampire incident didn't happen in 1932. So I checked all of the Louisiana indexes. No men named Carter, period, were executed from 1911 to 1932. None appeared on the 1722 to 1875 index either. An Aaron Carter, I want some candy, shows up in 1878 on the 1876 to 1910 index. Wow, so maybe Aaron Carter was an immortal vampire. Rest in peace to the prince, right? I think he did OD recently, but I'm not an expert on Aaron Carter. Um, these were alleged vampires we were talking about here. Maybe they somehow lived on death row for decades. Maybe when capital punishment resumed in 1976, they were still there. No Carter has ever been executed on death row in Louisiana since Herman in 1943, unless, of course, deathpenaltyusa.org missed one. So I think that is a great example of trying to practically go about these sensational stories. One more bit on this is essentially that what I said earlier. She goes into it in a little more detail, but the idea that so they were, apparently the lore goes, they were executed as serial killers, but even if people thought they were, even in the story itself, there were no bodies found, so none of it makes any sense. They couldn't have been put to death for being murderers. And so yeah, New Orleans slacking on its vampire lore a little bit, coming in hot with some of the sensational details and not even having kernels of truth to back it up, unfortunately. But the next one is a little more interesting in terms of the kernels of truth. I guess I'll give you this story, and then I'll ask for some of your overall thoughts on the New Orleans lore, Chris. The next one is actually where American vampire lore was introduced, lore-wise, and also theoretically, like where vampires were literally introduced. And this has to do with the casket girls of New Orleans from France in the 1720s. Casket, it's interesting how this plays into some of the like the pageantry of the symbolism. Casket was originally not only as a burial box, it was an empty box in general, a large empty box. So oftentimes caskets, it was synonymous with like traveling crate. So people would travel with caskets. And so these casket girls came from France to New Orleans as a way to fortify the colonies, get young women in there to partner up and get more babies in the French colony. And so the lore unfolds in a couple different ways, and basically either the casket girls themselves were the vampires and they used their caskets as their coffins to sleep in, or the casket girls unwittingly smuggled vampires into America in their caskets, because part of the lore also is that the caskets were meant to be empty. They traveled with belongings, but also bring some stuff because, you're coming to a new place. You want something to keep all your shit together while you're like figuring everything out. So makes enough sense. But yeah, so that's essentially the gist there. And like I said, that's how vampires were introduced into the new world one way or the other. So, and there's no real evidence to back that up, but the casket girls was a very real phenomena. And um I'm not like an absolute expert, but as far as I know, more talk of vampires was starting to happen around that time. So it does coincide historically. So that is at least enough of a kernel of truth to tickle my fancy a little more than these other two stories. And you could find more. We might get in. I'm sure we'll probably, depending on time, because there's plenty we could get into some different aspects of vampire lore in older history, but still fairly modern. Like there's the New England vampire panic of the 19th century that had a lot to do with tuberculosis. I'm sure we'll get into that a little more later, but that is, like I said, New Orleans definitely ground zero, however you slice it, for American vampire lore. So I wanted to go for the meatiest vampire tales of New Orleans, and that's what we have. So what do you think, Chris?
I'm trying to stay on track with the New Orleans with the distortion and the lack of like factual records with the lore. Um, Especially since it was like a new thing in the Americas, because there's a lot of lore and history, um, you know, uh,
Which we will get into a little bit as well.
yeah, taken down from Eastern Europe and China, especially and
Hmm.
Egypt. But yeah, I mean, the distortion of facts and a lack of a consistent story with all this is just a good way, I think, to distort actual, potential actual histories and traditions and kind of mythologize them. Like, in America, we have the sensationalized version of, all monsters, but, same with the zombie and the vampire. It's all does all stem from actual concepts and traditions and old teachings and quote unquote ancient technologies. So yeah, I think that's a great way to get people um misled, and then the creation of like again the Hollywood version of vampires is so far off from what I've stumbled across, and which we'll get more into later. But I know you were talking to just and in the beginning about like the goth culture and just which is the dramatic heavy, which seems to be persistent in New Orleans too. You know, same with the New York underground also.
Hmm.
We've touched on it before, but I know dramatization and acting like that, theatrics is a great way to evoke or invoke or open yourself up as a channel for spirits, and it's a great way to show reverence. So I think something like that is a means of yes, it's theatrics, but I think it also actually can help psychologically get you in that mindset again and leave you open to um again as a channel of sorts. And then you were talking too about like the factory with these guys, they like bodies hanging and shit, and like a bloodletting factory almost.
Right,
Like
right.
it made me think of the concepts that is unfortunately associated a lot with a lot of dark cults, where they the concept of breeders. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, where they actually
Yeah.
will, yeah. So that almost that
Exactly what
made
it
me,
sounds like, folks. That's exactly
yeah.
what it sounds like.
It's an unfortunate dark aspect of the world, but
Yeah.
it is out there, and it sounded like these guys were had their may have had their own breeding factory of sorts. Um, and sorry, I got a little lost when you're talking. I started taking a couple notes, but
It's perfectly understandable, especially with a topic like this. This is like voodoo, where it's so sprawling. There's so many different angles coming at you all at once.
yeah, and a lot of the stuff that I was focusing on uh leading up to this was um I was thinking about it, and I was reading this book by John Michael Greer. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a big occult author, but he has this
Yeah.
book called Monsters, and it's kind of just like an index of the actual lore behind a lot of the um yeah, our concepts of monsters. But um
I'm
I was
99% sure that Justin Otto, the homie, has had John Michael Greer on his show before. So
oh, awesome.
yeah, people can go and listen to that one.
He's a fucking knowledgeable guy. I've heard him quite a few times over the years. Great
Yeah,
author as well.
I've had him recommended to me to get in touch with, so I very well might try and get in touch with him one of these days when I'm back in the guest phase of things.
Yeah, that
Um,
would be, I could picture you guys having a great conversation. Um,
but I didn't mean to cut you off, and it sounds like you were very much looking into the lore of things, and that is definitely where we're headed next. So,
yeah,
um,
and more focused. I was more focused, I guess, on the etheric nature of the
okay, right.
parasitic etheric nature of what the vampire lore seems to encompass. Um, but yeah, like I said, I'm trying to stay a little bit on track this time and focused on the real world in Louisiana, like you're talking about.
Well,
Uh,
I mean, well, don't worry. We're gonna get into all those sections. So I respect your what's the word I'm looking for? I respect your discipline holding off. But don't worry, we're gonna get there, and we are rounding that plate right now because we are getting into Mary McFadden's history of vampires and their transformation from monsters to the monstrous, tragic, and romantic figures. So, and this will lead us through the Jungian analysis a bit and some of the lore, and will lead us right up to the gates of talking more about some human vampire culture. And I think at that point, that'll probably be the easiest position for some more occult esoteric ideas. But I mean, feel free to jump in at any time, man. Definitely don't hold back, although I appreciate your timing. Don't hold back. So all right, let's get into this here. From Mary McFadden. And like I said, we're gonna stretch our legs with this one because I mean this show is all about Jungian analysis, so she's given us everything we want here. The origins of the word vampire differ from the origins of the lore. The origins of the word are debatable, and accounts of vampirism predate the word itself. And in her article, The History of the Word Vampire, Katarina M. Wilson indicates there are four popular theories as to the word's origin. However, she suggests that the most widely accepted roots are Slavic. But the strongest running theories overall are Slavic, Greek, or Hungarian, essentially for the origins of the actual word vampire. Um, in general, though, and a lot of that is like dealing with translation, and it's the further back you get in history with languages, the more speculative the context of some of the words becomes. So you're getting into that kind of territory, linguistic territory. But the earliest reference we have to a vampire is from an old text in Russian written in 1047 AD. And that is a statement given by Stanley Stepanek, assistant professor in the Department of Slavic Languages and Literature at the University of Virginia. Some of the first, the earliest accounts of vampires, and again, just to show you how much interpretation plays a role in vampire lore, the further back you go. Some people say, you could find like the first vampire in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Um, in essence, right?
I
And,
even
and
heard one guy mention how even back to ancient Mesopotamia, there were even some figures. One of them being something referred to as Lilitu, which is synonymous with Lilith, I guess. Which
right,
there's some
right. That
interesting.
would be the Epic of Gilgamesh. Yeah.
Okay,
And I think and I'm glad you remembered the specifics there, because absolutely. I think what that harkens to is the idea that the vampire in so many ways is just kind of an an offshoot of like the demonic archetype in and of itself. So but yeah, so you take that for what you will. Some of these other vampires, I have Huri Grando, I assume that's how you say the name, 1656, hailing from modern day Croatia, which was called Istria at the time. Grando was reportedly the first person ever described as a vampire in historical records. It was said that he rose from the grave to terrorize his village until he was decapitated. Um, And so we mentioned that the earliest reference we have to a vampire, 1047 AD, but the actual term vampire, as we know it, made its debut in 1725, and that apparently that had a lot to do with like whispers of the let's see. Let me read this here. So this is coming from Adam Groom. We will come across his name as well, but he's in the source material here as a scholar of some of this lore. But around that time, the ruling class of the Habsburg Empire, controlled by the German royal family, whose capital was Vienna, Austria, were hearing alarming stories coming out of the borderlands that they'd recently annexed from the Ottoman Empire farther east. In the 1720s, the military is sent to investigate what's going on, Groom said. And in 1725, there's a report sent back saying that a body has been exhumed and staked and then cremated because it was terrorizing the local community. Over the next decade, Groom noted, fascination with the concept of vampires spread across Europe. Interdisciplinary teams of military officials, medical officers, magistrates, theologians, and philosophers carried out investigations into claims of vampiric activity, exercising Enlightenment era reasoning. By the mid 18th century, a report from the Austrian Empress's personal physician determined the existence of vampires to be a medical impossibility and disparaged the Slavic communities whose folklore had long considered them a real threat. Um, let's see, that Mr. What was his name? We just came across him here. Mr. Stanley Stepanek here notes that the vampire was primarily a symbol of things we did not understand. Um, and he noted that pellagra, a dietary deficiency that can result from corn-heavy diets, can cause extreme skin sensitivity to sunlight, and noting a potential historical factual undertone for some vampire lore. And I paused for a moment just there because I should probably note some of this is integrated with other articles that you can find very easily accessible in the show notes, but we're going to be getting back into that Jungian analysis here shortly. But pellagra wasn't a problem in Eastern Europe, Stepanek further notes, until there was trading infrastructure to bring corn over from the Americas. Being a relatively new condition to the region during the quote-unquote vampire epidemic, it would have been more likely to confirm pre-existing beliefs rather than creating the lore in the first place. He also noted that bad breath is part of vampire lore and also associated with pellagra. Scholars think people also used vampiric traits to explain rabies, which will probably come up more in the werewolf episode as well, with its dramatic and untimely lethal symptoms, including insomnia and aversions to light and water. So that makes a lot of sense. Stepanek noted that there was a rabies outbreak in Europe during the 18th century in the middle of this particular bout of vampire hysteria. Pressure that builds up during decomposition also can push the blood of the corpse into its mouth, creating the impression of a creature that has drank blood recently. Generally, we might consider a vampire a soulless, undead creature who cannot see its own reflection. It has two long fangs at the top of its mouth, puncturing its victims, the human prey. Its weaknesses are garlic, sunlight, the staking, the beheading, fire, and holy water. However, a look at ancient vampire lore nets a broader definition of the vampire, getting back into some deep symbolism here. Plagues that leave blisters, more plague talk, rabies that causes foaming at the mouth, coma patients thought to be dead but waking up, and possibly suffers of porphyria, which causes the skin to rash and blister in the sunlight. We also mentioned pellagra there, a dietary deficiency. And all of these were considered forms of demonic and or vampiric possession, also showing the Venn diagram of those two titles there. This evidence provoked scared villagers to unearth deceased, stake and decapitate them, and that's where we get a lot of this lore coming from when we mentioned the blood in the mouth and things like that. And it's debated by people to this day whether the origins of vampire lore came from a ghostly or demonic origin or had a flesh and blood nature to it. But the point's probably moot in the long run. I mean, they were both influential, and part of what makes the vampire so unique in a lore perspective is that it does seem to encapsulate both.
I
And
actually wrote some notes about that. There, one of the differences actually is that the vampire lore, from what I understand, it's not a non-human spirit like demons, angels, or fae, because it requires um, the vessel of someone who was once human to be able to go through the process required to um, integrate the vampire technology, quote unquote. It goes a lot into like Egyptian lore too, with like the etheric body and avoiding the second death.
well, let's hear some of it. Let's get into it.
Okay, so yeah, where do we go? So not a non-human spirit like demons, angels, and fae. I just said that. The concepts, the Egyptian Ba and Ka. Ba is likened to a spirit. The aspect of the spirit not linked to the physical body, while the Ka is primarily connected to the physical body, but can travel short different distances, I guess. Um, which is where the tradition of mummification comes in. So it's a preservation to avoid the second death, and they try to maintain the physical body through offerings of etheric energy, so like food and drink. Um, but I guess a part of the lore is when the tombs were stopped being attended to and the offerings were were not able to be kept up with. Um, I believe it was the Ka could leave the body a little bit and go seek out its own sources of etheric energy, but because it was, again, it's not a physical entity, it's kind of limited onto what it can obtain a lot of the times. And uh this guy referenced how feces and urine was the Ka, which when it leaves the body could be seen a little bit as like a luminous body, which is called the Ku, the Khu. um but yeah, it's all about sustaining the etheric body to avoid the second death, I guess.
Fascinating.
And um yeah, it's like the last survival of like an ancient technique to preserve immortality, spiritual act of sacrifice to remove oneself from the cycle of reincarnation in order to serve a purpose which requires more than a single lifetime. Um, so it's essentially like an etheric revenant. It's
Yeah.
is what they refer to it as.
Revenant.
And
That's a good word to give the definition of, because that comes up a lot in vampire lore. It's like a precursor. So let me pull that up here. Revenant, a person who has returned, especially supposedly from the dead. Okay, okay. So it also applies to the Leonardo movie where he got fucked up by that bear, because that
okay,
was a
yeah,
hell of a return.
that
uh,
scene is fucking wild, man.
yeah,
Um,
based on a true story too. If for anybody who didn't know that,
yeah,
which I didn't know.
that guy was a fucking rugged man.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but
So
yeah. Oh, sorry. But yeah, it's essentially like it has a lot to do. You can start to prepare to your etheric body before you die, which there's a lot of esoteric, a lot of like meditation and stuff like that. Stuff that's not directly contributed to obtaining the vampire status can, also lead to strengthening the etheric body in a similar way.
yeah.
Um,
It very much reminds me, it's got like Tibetan Book of the Dead kind of vibes, but even more specifically, since voodoo came from a different part of Africa, it is not surprising to find more incorporation of the dual etheric nature of human beings, like two spirits. So that's interesting. That's a very African mentality, I guess. I like it.
yeah, and also of note too. Um, I never associate a lot of vampire culture to China or Asia, but that's they have their own um it's called a Chiang Shi,
Hmm.
and it's a variation of a similar species to like the Nosferatu type vampire, but it's a completely different entity apparently.
Hmm.
Different looks different, but sustains itself with the same etheric properties and shit.
Fascinating. Well, let's get into some more of how our psyches are, like, what is going on. So probably there's no such thing as a vampire, right? They If there is, it has something to do. This is how I interpret it. We're taking the full Black Hoodie Alchemy scope here. If there's anything real vampiric, it probably has something that's probably closer akin to like shadow people type stuff, where there are underpinnings of scientific explanation, but the more you hear firsthand accounts, the weirder shit starts to get. And, sleep paralysis associated with shadow people, and both of those, not always, so don't freak yourself out, but it's just the fucking truth of the data. They are precursors to other paranormal phenomena. So in that sense, something that is a parasitic demonic entity, and in a lot of cases here in the West, when you say something like demonic entity, it's almost, implied that it's parasitic. I do think that things like those exist in one form or another. And, we've talked about those things at greater lengths in other episodes on this show. You can find those pretty easily. I try to label them pretty well. So, but that said, I definitely don't think as much as it would tickle my dark fantasy nerd brain, I don't think, and it would terrify my real practical mind that there are real vampires, immortal vampires. Definitely not. So why is it such a recurring theme? It's like as fucking old as like the flood myth and like creation myths and stuff. Vampires, especially how if you want to slice the pie this way and talk about like the precursors of Lilith, who we brought up in the Santa Muerte episode last time, the queen of the tree of death, and then um then there's a lot to be said. And I think also it's worth mentioning briefly that if you do run along those lines and you incorporate the tree of death into archetypal vampire analysis, there's quite a bit to glean from that, because the tree of death being the opposite of the tree of life, how it's modeled is these are shells that encompass, that are like the distance between you and divinity. And the tree of life, these 10 Sephiroth being the manifestations of divine experience, existence. And so it does play into the whole vampire, the fact that the immortality is giving up your soul. So, but let's read some more of this. Throughout the history of vampires, from folklore to literary fiction, the portrayal of these inhuman creatures has metamorphosized from Carl Jung's myth, born out of the shadow archetype, into three distinct vampire archetypes, and none of which have completely left their mythic origins behind. And yes, let us remember it is splitting hairs, but it's an important hair to split. Myths are not themselves archetypes. They are created by archetypes. So they are the use of the archetypes. And vampires incorporate a lot of different archetypes, all stemming from the shadow archetype itself. But a part of what this woman here argues is that vampires, starting as, and and again, I don't know where all this leads, but perhaps this helps us understand the difference between demons and vampires in a symbolic sense. She argues that vampires go from being simply myth to becoming lesser archetypes. um I mean, some of this might seem like garbled semantics, but it's basically like a cascading umbrella diagram. The archetypes, which some consider, including myself, synonymous with the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, some of the irreducible complexity of physical and psychological existence. And there's a list of those, and then those archetypes are personified concretely, but in varying degrees. You know how you can find different iterations, but then when those are taken and exercised in lore as characters, that becomes the myth. And then also, for further explanation of just evolutionary psychology, you start taking things and sharing that between people. The exchange of those myths, archetypes, symbols, that's the meme. Okay, so a little complex, but it's like riding a bike. Once you get it, it's just a basic cascade effect. Um, so by examining the etymology of the word vampire, ancient vampire folklore, early to modern vampire literature, and early to contemporary vampire cinema, this paper will show that the vampire is no longer relegated to the role of the antagonist, to the story's protagonist, and we have this sort of tragic anti-hero. So, but let's you talked about the some of the Asian vampires. Here's some other stuff that Mary McFadden has compiled for us in her analysis. We have a Celtic vampire, the uh, Abartak, is my best guess, which is a jealous, dwarfish, cruel chieftain and sorcerer from the Irish town of, oh, I'm not even going to, Slaughterverty in Londonderry. who ruled during the 5th and 6th centuries. Some stories say he fell to his death when he climbed a ledge outside his wife's bedroom to catch her cheating on him. And let's see, he rose from the dead and it started terrorizing people. And at that time, there was apparently it was a common like druid burial rite to bury people upside down to trap them in their grave, and that's what they did with this guy. There was in India a Baital, a Baital, something like that, an 11th century Sanskrit story. And it tells the account of a Baital and a king named Vikram. I don't know why, but Vikram is just a very not intimidating name. Sounds like an easygoing guy. This vampire was an evil spirit that could possess the dead. He was half man, half bat, drank human blood, devoured sacrifices of human flesh. There was also the Slavic Upyr, Upyr, and see, it had a heretical, very satanic ties. It was also the spawn of a witch or a werewolf. The methods of killing these things, it had a lot to do with modern vampire literature: holy water, driving the stake through the chest, decapitation, and incineration. There were ancient Greek vampires, Vrikolakas. Initially, they were more spirit in nature than actual physical beings, eventually transforming into the more traditional depictions of the reanimated dead. They were thought to rise from the grave and seek out family members, specifically, attacking them and sucking their blood. Burning one of them is the only foolproof way of destroying it. We also have the Berwick vampire. And see, in England, 1196, a prosperous but a morally bankrupt merchant died of the plague, and after his burial, written accounts said that he would roam the streets at night, spreading disease as he went, announcing that there'd be no peace for the villagers unless his body was set aflame and burned to ashes. And he was known as the Berwick vampire, and he is one of those stories that very much survives to this day. So, what is a takeaway from a lot of these early stories? Well, no matter what you call them, they have yet to move from humankind's subconscious to conscious mind, from the realm of myth to archetype. There's an extremely inhuman quality about them, which I think is also an important point, a subtle point to drive home in the difference. Representatives of the Jungian monster myth, which Joseph Campbell goes into a bit more, and his name we will come across a little further on. When stories of the vampire began to show up in literary fiction, they followed the same patterns of early vampire folklore, in that they were monstrous creatures lacking a moral compass. However, these vampires often had the ability to mimic humanity, and their monstrous side could be hidden. The human-like vampire is the beginning of the evolution of vampires that ultimately ends in them reaching a romantic or heroic status, a la Louis in Interview with the Vampire. And I guess fucking Robert Pattinson in Twilight too. Fucking since it came up, like, salute to Robert Pattinson for real though. He's a great actor, and if you hear any interviews with him while he's promoting the Twilight movies, he's pretty honest about, and he's not disrespectful either. He's not like, fuck all these fans, these idiots for watching the movies. He's just like, I don't even know much about Twilight, and I find some of these the choices in the script a little silly, and he could just tell he's like, God, I can't wait for these movies to just be done with so I can move on to some interesting shit in my career.
Just a payday for him. He's lucky too that didn't like pigeonhole him.
Yeah.
Into it,
Yeah.
you
That
know?
was it. Almost did. He did get lucky.
Yeah. Starts and goes, 1 for the heart, 2 for the mind, 3 for the light that reflect when I shine, Four for my peoples in my corner, help me hold the crown. You hold me up and I'll hold you down. Come on, one for the heart, two for the mind, three for the light that reflect when I shine. Four for my peoples in my corner, help me hold the crown. You hold me up and I'll hold you down. You can hear the waters dripping through the sands of time. I stand in line from the wrong side of the mind. I brings it live, hold it down for those yet to come. Fire in the lungs, who could bring them live as sun? I rhyme with one finger high, hold it to the sky. It's do or die in this life, I stay true to mine. Who decides who you call when your worlds collide? I spit the cold hard facts on the frozen ground. I holds it down, spill the game out my heart and soul. I traded blood, sweat, and years for this rock and roll. You know I shed a few tears when I lost my bros. What's the cost in tow? We made it big but nearly lost it all. And you was there for me through it all. You slipped, got the fall, you got sick, I got the call. Sleeping not at all. Long nights lying there in the hospital, praying for you. Down on my knees across the hall.
Yeah, put your hands up.
Y'all.
Put your hands
Make some
up.
noise.
Put your hands up. Put your hands up. Put your hands up.
Yeah.
Put your hands up.
Yeah.
Put your hands up.
Yeah. It goes one for the heart, two for the mind, three for the light that reflect when I shine. Four for my peoples in my corner, help me hold the crown. You hold me up and I'll hold you down. Come on, one for the heart, two for the mind, three for the light that reflect when I shine. Four for my peoples in my corner, help me hold the ground. You hold me up and I'll hold you down. Yeah. Yo, what up, Barry? Make some noise.
Has gravity got you down? Do you not understand the difference between a wave or a particle? What about the planets? How do all those rotate around each other? Laws of physics and other sciences can be confusing. So the next time you're curious just how exactly E equals MC squared, hire a highly trained and qualified professional. That's right, it's space lawyers. Space lawyers are skilled in litigation with the laws of time, space, cosmic ghost pirates, and various other lawyerings. Each space lawyer has a PhD in space law from the Cosmic Hall of Space Justice, and they can get you out of just about any sticky situation. So stop bonking your head on things, or accidentally creating big bangs with your haphazard studies in quantum physics. Leave all of that to the highly trained professionals prepared to litigate these laws for you. Just call 1-800-SpaceLawyer.com for more info.
Space lawyer.
Space lawyers cannot be used in a regular court of law. They can only accept cash and no cosmic traveler checks nor Visa debit cards. Please wait up to 4 cosmic business days for our space lawyers to get back to you. Yes, hello there. It's your friend, Steve Buscemi, aka Jefferson Tillamook Slinger, and I'm also a classy movie critic. But today I'm here to briefly tell you children out there or listening to this Black Alchemy podcast that there's a lot of people out there that they think that Alex Jones and the late comedian Bill Hicks are different people, and I'm here to tell you that they are the same people. And I mean, I have some slides to show you here. Just look at his cheeks. Look at their cheeks side by side, and just tell me that those cheeks don't look so similar. Now look at their eyeballs and their hairline. The eyeballs, the cheeks, and the hairline is the same person, okay? Anybody out there, you're getting duped. Wake up, sheeple. Bill Hicks is Alex Jones. This has been Steve Buscemi, and I just wanted to drop a little bit of a truth bomb on you today. And here's a little bit of a life hack for you. If you ever wake up and you have stray hairs going all over the place, you know how that goes. All you gotta do is just stop washing your hair, and it just sticks to your head. So, problem solved.
Howdy do, everybody. It's your good old friend Tippy Patson here from the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And behold, for I have something to lay upon you. Okay. Recently, I smoked this drug called a basuco. It's from Colombia. My buddy gave it to me. It's cocaine paste. You see, and I recently been doing some of this, and it occurred to me that last night, after some Google searching, what happened to me after smoking some basuco was I achieved Tibetan rainbow body. How about that, y'all? Yeah, my body shrank. I got all real tiny. I started like emitting rainbows from my body, and like I smelled really good, as they say, that the people do. And dang old man, I even, I didn't die. I'm good. I'm still good right here, but I even lost a few pounds. So I was thinking, how about I just go dang old on and sell Tippy Patson's Rainbow Body Weight Loss Program. Dang old man, that's right. Shed a few pounds the Tibetan Buddhist way. And, you can go to my website, Tippy Patson and all that, or you can dial 1-800-spacelawyers.com for more info. Now, a part of this is you need to know more about this basuco drug, okay? It's very interesting, and it helped me in the whole process of achieving rainbow body. And it's, like I said, it's a cocaine paste. It's extracted not in laboratories, but like good old fashioned, like in people's kitchens and stuff. And it's extracted and dissolved with things like gasoline, sulfuric acid, chloroform, kerosene, acid from car batteries, and then it's cut, to make bigger and give it a little bit of a punch. With Ajax, talcum powder, ground up bricks or cornstarch and things like that. And on the streets, they call it things like Suzuki, banana, little devil, and freckles. So it's a real dang old fun thing to smoke, and it tastes real good, y'all. So, smoke some basuco and, partake in Tippy Patson's Rainbow Body Weight Loss Program, y'all. Come on, let's do it together. We'll be small, tiny people with a rainbow body way, and then it'll be a good time. All right, take it easy, everybody.
She told me write about your life. Tell them about your struggles and your son. Tell them about the light, the end of the tunnel from which you come. Tell them everything they needin' to hear. Tell them more they cleanin' their ears and open their eyes, the less they needin' to fear. Tell them demons real, them seeing is here. 4 seasons a year. Spit the fire off the weed of the beer. Spit the facts, no holding it back. Spit it real for Ed, Elijah, and Matt. Nathaniel, Andy, and Marie, my mom, and my brother Zach, and that's real family mathematics. William Streets where the magic happened. Adding tales of that ink, you would've said legit did it if you knew me back then. I made the change from a common thief to up close and personal with conscious speech. Walk these streets my whole life wondering, is it God a beast who keeps peeps in panic mode, preventing peace? Peace to peeps with passion, push it past the peaks, push it past disaster, pen a masterpiece. Master's thesis, leaking off these tattered sheets. Ashes turn to embers as your past repeats. So turn it up, got weed and burn it up. In this life trying to make my mark and learn enough. Return enough back to the earth to earn the love. Return the blood back to the heart, return the love. Yo, so turn it up, got weed and burn it up. In this life trying to make my mark and learn enough. Return enough back to the earth to earn the love. Return the blood back to the heart, return the love. Yo, so turn it up.
Scriptures for lost souls in the crossroads. Spitting on tracks, it becomes classic. My stripes show like regiments.
So, vampire literature came into vogue in Europe during the 19th century. From folklore and fairy tales to Gothic literature, stories of vampires were all the rage at this point. In fairy tales of the Russians and other Slavs, Ace and Olga Pilkington devote an entire section to early 19th century tales of the undead translated from their original Slavic languages. Salute for that. That always sounds like a whole endeavor translating the whole swaths of literature like that. Um, these stories mostly lend authority to the idea that vampires are evil creatures, some bearing a remarkable resemblance to Bram Stoker's Dracula. By the end of the 19th century, the quintessential literary vampire solidified in the form of said Dracula. Uh, and while some cinematic versions, to some extent, portray him as a romantic seducer, he is still undeniably evil. Yet his tragic story has entranced readers for centuries. Vlad the Impaler, touted as Stoker's inspiration for Dracula, bears little resemblance to him other than sharing a name. In Stoker's personal notes for Dracula, there is only a short mention of the name Dracula in reference to Vlad the Impaler. However, in the novel itself, Van Helsing mentions that a scholar friend of his believes, quote, that he must indeed have been that voivode Dracula who won his name against the Turk over the great river on the very frontier of Turkeyland. So the Vlad reference. Assistant Professor Annie Cocobobo from the University of Kansas believes that rather than Vlad the Impaler being the inspiration for Dracula, it is more likely that, at least in follow through and like real visual symbolic inspiration, that Elizabeth Bathory, known as the Blood Countess, was his true inspiration. And if you don't know about her, we won't get deep into that lore, but she is literally known different iterations of the lore, but for bathing in the blood of young sacrifices to maintain her youth. So that's pretty creepy. Other characteristics of Dracula meant to strike fear in the hearts of mortals are his power over storms and the dead. He's able to disappear from one location and reappear in another, becoming mist or dust. He travels on rays of moonlight and can enter a room through the tiniest of crevices, making escape from him nearly impossible. He can hypnotize humans to do his bidding, as well as command rats, owls, bats, moths, foxes, and wolves, and can even transform himself into a wolf or a bat. Perhaps even scarier for its implications for humans is his ability to become younger when he is well fed, blood being the only sustenance he needs. For all his powers, though, Dracula is not without his limitations. Though he has the ability to enter a room through tiny cracks, he is unable to enter a space that he has not been invited to, but need only be invited once. After that, he can come and go as he pleases. Yet another one of his limitations is his ability to change from form only at noon, sunset, or sunrise. This leaves him more vulnerable if caught in an animal state. He also needs to be near his home soil, which he keeps in coffins in various locations in order to remain at full strength. That's interesting. From the earliest to present day vampire stories, these monsters are never completely invincible. If they were, there would be no hope for the human race. If vampires started as a myth that our subconscious mind created, as the embodiment of our dark nature, the shadow complex, then having the ability to overcome the vampire means that we also have the means to overcome our own dark nature. Let's see. Yeah, more on Nosferatu a little bit. The silent film, produced by Prana Films, directed by F.W. Murnau, was the first cinematic depiction of Dracula. Through the vampire character played by Max Schreck, named Count Orlok, the similarities between the film and the book were close enough that Stoker's widow, Florence Stoker, successfully sued Prana Films for copyright infringement. So, yeah, very much drawing on those inspirations. One of the most famous 20th century cinematic versions of Dracula, and the first to include sound, was the classic 1931 version starring actor Bela Lugosi. Not caring to repeat Prana Films' blunder, Universal Pictures secured the rights to produce their adaptation of Stoker's story. And this is where things take a turn in the more modern direction. Dracula may be a monster, but unlike Count Orlok, Lugosi's character is no monster in appearance. This cinematic version is one of the first to incorporate the sexual element in Dracula's visage. Lugosi's character was a handsome man, he sure was, aristocratic in appearance. His posture remained straight, and his speech clear and concise. His clothes were never rumpled, and he moved with grace and dignity. His focused stare and slow movements towards Mina's neck gave the appearance of a suitor moving in for a kiss, thus cultivating the idea that a vampire's nature might be multifaceted. This perversion of the original Dracula story that removes some of the sinister traits of Dracula and replaces them with the characteristics that viewers can relate to paves the way for the tragic vampire, the tortured hero, the path from the shadowed myth into a more concrete, lesser archetype. However, in the mid 20th century, a new kind of vampire began to emerge, the tragic vampire. Though they were on the precipice of good and evil, they were worthy of our pity. These creatures were only doing what it was in their nature to do. Most of them never asked for this monstrous state. They cannot help what they are, and like the Byronic hero, Lord Byron, the motif of the Lord, that we're finding the pageantry of it all. They scorn their very nature and lament their fate. Referring to these creatures as sympathetic is a misnomer, though. It insinuates that they feel sympathy for others, and that's not always the case. However, they're generally self-centered creatures. They bemoan the fact that they are monsters, that they lack in love, that they have to kill to survive. But yeah, oftentimes bemoaning less the life that they're taking. But it also depends on the lore. Like I remember Louis in Interview with the Vampire really tried hard to be a vegetarian vampire, or like, quote unquote, feasting on animals instead of humans. So let's see, melancholy would be a better word to describe these tragic creatures who cannot see past their own pain. Literature and cinematic stories such as Dark Shadows, Interview with the Vampire, and Dracula Untold are the bridge between the monstrous and romantic vampire. For a change from monstrous to romantic to occur, the vampire must first learn to hate its very nature, just as in the Bible, humankind are told to, quote, abhor what is evil and hold fast to what is good, unquote. As the Bible scripture says, humans are no strangers to the fight against their own nature. Joseph Campbell states that myths inspire the realization of the possibility of your perfection, the fullness of your strength, and the bringing of solar light into the world. Slaying monsters is slaying the dark things. And throughout this Jungian analysis, Mary McFadden here is referencing an interview that someone did with Joseph Campbell. And so that interview asked Campbell, how do I slay that dragon in me? To which Campbell responds, my general formula is, of course, follow your bliss. Find where it is and don't be afraid to follow it, which is good advice, especially when you know the context, because Campbell was not saying to follow your bliss and avoid everything else. He was saying follow your bliss, and then when you come across the hard things, it has a better context. And actually, later on in his life, Joseph Campbell, he very much did sort of put an asterisk on that. He said, because of the way some people misinterpreted that, I really should have said follow your blisters, because and that reminds me of the whole Manly P. Hall quote that nature has given humanity the gift of labor, because through labor we learn all things. So let's see, getting closer to the end of this analysis before we get into some modern literal human vampire culture. Not only are modern authors creating vampires that are no longer frighten in the way of their 19th century predecessors, but they are also making completely new rules for what defines vampires. And yeah, there's the vampire lore is pretty expansive these days. It's pretty cool. Another Campbell quote. So when the interviewer asked Campbell, so the hero evolves over time like most other concepts, right? Campbell replies, he evolves as culture evolves. Like the age-old hero archetype, the vampire has evolved to meet the needs of today's society. Jung's shadow archetype is the dark side of the human psyche. This dark side gives birth to the subconscious monster myth, with the vampire being one manifestation of that myth. By moving from humankind's subconscious to conscious mind, going from the stories born of generalized fears to fictional literature meant to entertain, vampires moved from myth to archetype. In the same way, humans' dark nature moved from the unknown to known, or subconscious to conscious, or as Jung says, from the unconscious to conscious. I think a lot of this, I've talked about this in other episodes, has a lot to do with our true crime fascination in culture as we know it right now, which is cyclical. This is not the first wave of true crime we've had, and I don't think it's always bad. You know, some people can desensitize themselves, but there's a lot of integration elements as well. So, like humans, some vampires, once becoming self aware, become disgusted with who they were and long to be more, to be made pure. These vampires represent the whole, the fullest tragic vampire archetype, the vampire who abhors its own existence. It lives a self sacrificing life out of guilt and a need for redemption, pushing it further than the other descriptions in this continuum. Its repentance comes from a place of fear of damnation and a fear of the monster within them. And yet another vampire archetype to splinter from the vampire myth is the romantic vampire. The romantic vampire is a protector, a lover. It is very Edwardian. I put that in there. That's not that would be ridiculous if she put that in the peer-reviewed study. A paragon and has found its salvation in this existence. And though it still carries within it a repressed dark nature, what makes the romantic vampire a hero is its ability to resist the temptation to give in to its dark nature, though like humans it sometimes finds the temptation almost completely overwhelming. When the vampire evolves from the tragic vampire to the romantic one, it has reached its desired state. For Judeo-Christians and many other religions, this would be when they find their salvation. For those of certain other religions, as well as those without religious beliefs, this could be when they reach the pinnacle of what they wish to be. Also, kind of just naturally falling in line with the whole Lilith motif, the queen of the Qliphoth. She started as, the first wife of Adam, as we talked about in the last episode and other episodes. Check out the episode on the image of the devil. And then she was cast out because she thought they were stepping all over her. She was kind of used as just a physical object. And because of that, she was made a demon akin to Azazel in ancient Hebrew demonology. And over time, she has been reclaimed more as this almost like Gnostic Christian pagan goddess. And it reminds me very much of this continuum here. So, just as humans will always have their sinful nature or shadow self, that will always exist within these three vampire archetypes, a seed of that shadow. The vampire evolves as we evolve because that's what we use these myths, and that's what we use our lore for. And like humans, not all vampires evolved into this exalted state. Some never leave the monster archetype behind. And as Campbell states, what we call monsters can be experienced as sublime. You're climbing until suddenly you break past a screen and an expansive horizon opens out, and somehow, with this diminishment of your own ego, your consciousness expands to an experience of the sublime. I think that's a very good explanation for the dichotomy of following your bliss and blisters. Whether we're talking about vampires or monsters, those with the goal of salvation from their monstrous self and who work towards that goal will suddenly find that they have reached their destination. In the end, the vampire continues to stalk our imaginations because it offers a lens to examine the big, complex questions we face as humans. The expert Adam Groom considers a vampire a kind of thought experiment that professionals across disciplines use to reflect on their moment in history and quote unquote understand things like the spread of infection or even capitalist exploitation in different ways. These creatures have been used also in more recent decades to pose questions about what it means to be an outsider or to struggle with identity, or even characterize toxic interpersonal relationships that drain one party of energy and emotion. Over the course of the centuries and retellings of these myths, vampires have been transformed from a symbol of death and disease to different archetypes that can be seen as elegant and seductive. Vampires serve as a kind of mirror, and these creatures have been used. Yeah, I mean that's what it is. Ultimately, it is a bridging of the gap between the darker aspects. It's we all have those monsters inside ourselves. However, you choose to relate or associate with the symbols of the monster myth, and it is our existential responsibility to transmute and harness for the better those aspects within us. And yeah, that is it for the heavy Jungian analysis. And we got a bit more on vampire culture here. And then we could get into some of that, like I mentioned, New England vampire scare, if we want to here. We do still have a bit of time before we got to wrap it up. So there's no rush yet. Chris, what are you thinking so far, man? Let's hear from you.
So much. I mean, you covered a lot there. So let me try and get this as neat as possible. I was very curious how when you mentioned the Jungian aspect of this, I was wondering how that was going to tie into this, and it makes a lot of sense. Especially when you said like the self-disgust aspect of the vampire, kind of made me think of me in my addiction phase, like getting to the worst rock bottom and then being so disgusted with yourself that it opens up the realm of possibility of individuation with all these
Yeah,
shadow aspects.
definitely
And
something I can relate to as well.
yeah, man, and I think it's definitely an appropriate analogy, especially going back to earlier when I mentioned that the vampire is considered it's not a non-human spirit like demons and shit. So it is more comparable to the shadow aspect of ourselves. I think it represents that very well. Um, Here, yeah. Where else do I got? Uh, and you just said touch on the mirror aspect. The vampire serves as a mirror of our shadow. I find it kind of ironic that in the lore the vampire has no reflection in the mirror, so it's like
Huh. Yeah, no
serves
kidding.
serves as a mirror, but it only can take effect once we can no longer see ourselves in a certain
Fascinating.
way.
I
So
hadn't
that
gone down that thought rabbit hole yet.
I think, yeah, that's interesting for sure. And I want to jump back to talking about Dracula because
Yeah.
neither of us mentioned Bram Stoker's or Bram Stoker's Dracula in the I'm feeling Bram stoked, bro. Um,
Right, yes.
Dude, stoking the flames of the vampire, dude.
Have you seen the Aqua Teen Hunger Force where they go to visit Dracula's grave?
No. You'll have to send me this after.
Oh yeah, it's one of the greatest. I won't derail you, but I just want to give a teaser. If anyone is into that dumb stoner surrealist humor, this one 15-minute episode, John Benjamin, who voices Bob and a lot of others, from Bob's Burgers, voices Mothman, and he starts bothering the Aqua Teen crew. And in order to get away from Mothman, they take a road trip to go visit Dracula's grave. So it's just a preposterous episode. I love it. It's
Dude,
ridiculous.
and John Benjamin voicing anything like
Oh, he's a
Mothman.
legend.
He has one of those voices that's made for cartoons essentially.
Yeah, God,
Um
I would love to shake that man's hand and buy him a drink. He seems like a great dude and comedic genius. He's got a couple albums called Jazz Daredevil where he hires a really, really talented professional jazz ensemble band to play like 12 songs, and he doesn't know the first thing about piano. So he just went up there and tried his best. And it is like a 4-year-old just plodding away, just trying to keep up with these amazing jazz musicians. And I didn't think that instrumental music could be so fucking funny, but it is hilarious. You got to check that shit out.
I
Anyway,
will.
right,
That sounds like real jazz too. His fucking playing just random hating shit.
yeah,
There's no such
yeah,
thing as a wrong note, you know?
yeah, exactly. All right, well, good to liven it up a little bit here, but
Yeah,
um, so Dracula, you wanted to
yeah,
talk about Dracula some more.
yeah, yes, sir. Dracula and Bram Stoker. So,
Bram
what I
stoked,
was
bro.
Bram stoked, my bro. Um, I love it. So I apparently, from what I understand, Bram Stoker's Dracula is a highly like he took a lot of creative liberties with the vampire lore, and I find that interesting. Seems to contribute to the romanticization of a monster and kind of the relatability. But you mentioned that uh that Vlad Vlad Dracul, Vlad the Impaler is allegedly maybe not even the actual inspiration for Dracula. I think you said that.
He's
Um,
certainly some of it, but there might be larger influences.
okay, so I find it interesting. This we're gonna get deep for a second. That Vlad Dracul or Vlad the Dragon, the association to the reptilian and our reptilian nature, the reptilian
Mm,
part of our complex of our brain, which you could associate to our shadow aspect. But I find it like I think one of the things Bram Stoker wrongly associated vampires with is the connection to bats.
mm,
They seem to have more of a relation to again the reptilian nature
mm,
and just that predatory species, which also leads me back to the Neil Blomkamp theory of
right.
the apex predator that is like there was some evolutionary split with actual humans and again this advanced race potentially, which that story you could connect to a lot of shit like the Anunnaki. um a lot of cross threading my mind is doing, but especially like um maybe Vlad Dracul was not the actual inspiration, but I find it interesting that they use that because of the dragon association. And I love reptilians. I love thinking about reptilians. um, I don't know if they're exactly like walking around with us, but I think all of this, like you were saying, you don't really believe in vampires. I think a lot of this more relates to and mythologizes the etheric realm, which I'm personally inclined to, at this point in my life, um, have a bit of faith in there being an etheric realm and there being, um, you know, a hierarchical order to the etheric realm. But that seems to be what a lot of this is touching on, especially like
Yeah.
how Dracula travels, like on the um, can fit through the smallest hole of a door. You're talking on the
Yeah, and
like
talk about freaking like brooding glee club person. He travels on moonbeams. Wow, pageantry, man. That's fucking rad.
that's some gothic shit right there
Yeah.
for sure, dude. Um, but yeah, I think again this it has me looking even more um seriously at the possibility of the etheric realm and the etheric nature, and there being that being something that an aspect of our nature that's a higher part of the order that seems to govern a lot of what's going on here. I can't prove that obviously, but um and just the connection of just this whole spirit too to like succubus and incubus and sleep paralysis. It's just
Right.
apparently this has me just like is lighting up a bunch of random shit for me that
I'm
is
glad
ringing.
I'm really glad you said that because we basically touched on it, thankfully, already, but we did not explicitly state it. But that's a huge part of the carryover between sleep paralysis, shadow people lore, and vampires is like the incubus and succubus. I don't remember if, again, this whole debate on whether, yeah, they're a demon and it takes the form of a man or woman, and I did remember that the whole thing was that it was supposed to like have sex and take the seed of like a sleeping person. So and then also that snowballed into sleep paralysis lore of just simply like strangling you and stuff. But the sexual angle, so that's a huge piece of just this hodgepodge of what's going on with the vampire stuff. And a lot of times these days, especially, um, incubus and succubus are just used as terms for male and female vampire. And I'm seeing here that I'm just seeing from a Google search, so I might as well read it here. That incubus is apparently a Latin word which means nightmare. So
Okay.
interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. And I go quite a bit into sleep paralysis and symbolism and demonology in some other episodes. I even get into it quite a bit in my book Dive Manual, so keep that shit in mind.
Yeah,
Um,
dude, and some more connection too. Just the again, this the vampire lore in nature being about strengthening your etheric body for
right.
to avoid the second death, and sleep paralysis also being one of the methods used to propel oneself into astral projection.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's a lot of esoteric lore and truth about being able to navigate these different realms and shit. And um I think a lot of that is all tied into this. And I've heard the term even astral vampires. Or
Right.
you ever meet someone that you're like, man, that person's a fucking energy vampire. I cannot be around them. I can't be around them for more than 10 minutes without feeling absolutely exhausted, dude.
Yeah.
um I think that's a possibility. And I don't
I do believe that those people are a thing because that is the self-description of the human vampire, essentially, is a person that understands that part of their nature actually drains energy from other people in a way that feeds them, and they try to use that in a responsible, respectful way, ideally.
Yeah,
So
and
interesting.
I think there's some of those people that may not even necessarily be aware of their nature being able to do that. Like,
Yes.
dude, my fucking brother-in-law, total energy vampire. I love the guy, but holy shit. Um, it's so yeah, dude, even that aspect, like, um, if you're the idea of taking someone's blood, the victim will be weakened by that process. So maybe it's not even a literal thing, but just the mere process of vampirizing their energy. I just mentioned, like, be around certain people and you just feel fucking drained of all cognition, just physical energy. So I think there's some, again, that's you know taking it taking it seriously, but not literally. Um,
Right. So
and one
often the takeaway for esoteric philosophy.
Yeah, I think that's one of the mottos I like to remind myself of and live by consistently. And one other connection to Vlad the Impaler is that I remember hearing this years ago and had to look it up today, but King Charles of the royal family bragged about how he was a descendant of Vlad the Impaler and like a
Mm,
16th cousin removed or something like that.
mm.
And the royal family has a lot of questionable shit connected to them. And
To
you
say
know
the
I
least.
yeah and just and I guess I'll top all this off with just how much of this also seems to remind me and relate to the concepts and ideas behind, like, the process of adrenochrome.
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
that being a predatory activity for people who one could maybe associate with the reptilian nature. And
Mhm.
Anthony, last I'll say is if you don't believe in vampires, have you ever heard of a dude named David Blaine? Because I think that guy is a fucking vampire.
Maybe. Maybe, dude, if there's anyone who's a vampire, it'd probably be him. And that's the freaking plot of the vampire Lestat anyway, actually, is that Lestat, after he parts ways with Louis, becomes like a heavy metal rock star. He hides in plain sight. So maybe,
Okay,
maybe David Blaine is a
dude,
vampire.
and maybe you were right too. Aaron Carter, dude.
Maybe,
Some
yeah.
of these celebrity families
What kind of
talk
candy
about
was he
like,
really after?
yeah, dude. And dude, have you ever seen that old picture of a? It's a historical black and white photo of someone who looks a lot like Nicolas Cage, and there's all these like celebrity doppelgangers.
No,
Like
that's fun though. I like that.
that dude's probably a vampire too, with his
He could
fucking
be.
his tomb down in Louisiana.
All right. So the much teased human vampires of New Orleans mostly, but a little bit mention of elsewhere. And this is an article from CNN, which I thought was interesting. And we have mentioned the Netflix miniseries Dark Tourist in the last two episodes. Here's another one. I think this will be the last mention, but it is a great show. I'm not trying to harp on it too much, but it just it happens to be just lining up with everything, and I did rewatch it fairly recently, so that helps. But part of the episode that he spends in America is him going to New Orleans and checking out vampire culture. And he meets up with this dude named Maven Lore, which most certainly is not a birth name. That's not his Christian name. um,
There's been some awesome name drops in this episode, I will say.
yeah, yeah. And so this dude, we'll talk about him a little more, but in the Dark Tourist episode, and presumably still, he and that was filmed some years ago, but it's still fairly recent. He was an operating fangsmith in New Orleans. So he would go and give you, I don't know, porcelain or whatever, but like caps that you could take on and off, but that would fit snugly on there and just be straight up vampire fangs. And this is a dude that is a full on real life vampire. And let's talk about it a little bit. Let's read this article and learn some more. And like I say, you could check out freaking David Farrier going and getting his own set of fangs as part of that Dark Tourist bit. And he also goes to like a vampire ball in New Orleans, literally, like all dressed up to the nines and dancing and then drinking each other's blood on the side and shit like that. Um, as this article goes, Maven Lore, this fangsmith, found belonging in New Orleans and never left. Now a crafter of the bespoke acrylic fang. Okay, so acrylic. He's risen up to the reluctantly accepted role of king of the Big Easy's vampire court. That's right, folks. This man is the fucking king of the vampires in New Orleans. And this article was written like a couple of years ago, so this is up to date. Um, eh, of his placement, Maven says, being a part of the vampire court of New Orleans is about all of us coming up together. A victory for one person is a victory for all of us. We're all just kind of in a sink or swim mentality together. And I laugh, but it's the disclaimer that I gave at the beginning. It's a little bit of laugh with love. I was a different kind of brooding stereotype in high school, but like I said, these are just like the goth glee kids, like being a part of the vampire court of New Orleans. Like, yeah, you fucking living your best life out there, man. Good for you.
It's like the South Park kids, the goth kids, and the fucking vampire kids.
Right. Uh, Human vampires live, and they're fairly far from the fictional creatures we recognize. Their interpretations of vampirism vary fairly widely. Many of them feed off of energy or sexual encounters, but they always feed in some way. And feeding habits and fangs are just the trappings of the community that is as diverse as it is misunderstood. You may not even know they're vampires at all, at least not if you're searching for the stereotypical tip offs. There are no restrictions for self identifying vampires. They're not bound to nocturnal life or required to worship any fictional vampires or anything. The vampires of today are, in essence, people from different backgrounds with a common goal of belonging, who have found community with their fellow vampires. Living as a vampire is a subversive choice, a proud rejection of social norms, and in that way, it's an empowering way to live, said John Edgar Browning, a professor of liberal arts at the Savannah College of Art and Design, who spent years studying the vampire communities in New Orleans and Buffalo, New York, which is another American hub. Human vampires, he says, make accessible the infinite potential that exists for exposing and unfixing the repressive and oppressive categories out of which marginalization is born. So, in a way, these vampires are therapeutic for us. So, it seems to be an undeniable facet of the vampire lore, the catharsis. Yes, a few modern day vampires consume blood, often from consenting donors. Hopefully, always. Often is a weird word to use there. And also, typically, loved ones or partners, and in small amounts. But many abstain from or condemn that practice and instead find sustenance in sexual encounters or other experiences from which they can derive energy. Murdicus, who is another vampire, was in this article, was seeking answers from others like him when he joined vampire chat rooms in 1996. And after noticing for years that he could draw strength from charged situations, and that's how he came to realize that this was psychic feeding. I've never felt as though my body or even this time period aligns with my spirit or soul, he told CNN. Or more simply, I've always felt something was different about me that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He made friends in those chat rooms that are still in his life today, and offline, those connections have grown even stronger. Maven Lore found those connections when he first visited New Orleans 24 years ago, days before Halloween, and he's lived there ever since. I didn't even know there was such a community, he said, but they were family. And now they're his family too. He's eked out a significant role in the NOLA vampire scene, and aside from his Fangsmith business, he also mentors young vampires, a role that he stumbled into by accident, but nonetheless accepts. He resists being called a keeper of peace between vampires in the area, although he's known to regularly counsel and resolve arguments among members. We all just want to get along and be loved, he said. That's why I love the vampire community. It doesn't fucking matter what race, what gender you are, you're accepted. The enduring popularity of fictional vampires means that Murdicus and people like Maven Lore and others like them constantly clarify that they're not like nocturnal bloodsuckers that continue to entertain and terrify us. In fact, Murdicus said many human vampires remain out of the public eye due to the misconceptions. Not surprising. Now, Murdicus said he works to educate people about vampirism, and describing it as an amalgamation of physical, mental, and spiritual attributes, and emphasizing that vampires are largely productive members of society. Modern vampirism also does not have anything to do with the occult. Some people are also interested in it, but it is not a prerequisite whatsoever. But those and more popular vampire properties only intensify media attention on human vampires off screen. Murdicus said he prefers to keep in the shadows. How surprising. Plenty of vampire houses, clans, organizations, and individuals have carried on quite well without any sort of public knowledge. So long as there's interest in human vampires, Murdicus said he will be a somewhat reluctant spokesperson. He's even carried out surveys of fellow vampires to learn more about their backgrounds, feeding habits, and social lives. Both Lore and Murdicus said that vampirism doesn't occupy their entire lives. Both are in committed relationships with non-vampires, they said, and being a vampire is just one facet of who they are, not their defining quality. Murdicus's Vampire Alliance of Atlanta, Georgia, has mostly evolved into a relatively small, tight-knit crew of aging vampires, he said. The Georgia vampire's life is relatively quieter than Lore's. He prefers to slink around restaurants, bars, and cultural events rather than work and play in the New Orleans sleepless downtown. But just as some vampire groups in New York are highly influential, almost political organizations, and Ohio's vampire community are mostly psychic feeders, according to Murdicus, every vampire house, coven, or court has its own traditions and nuances. Most of us communicate with one another, even if we approach the path of vampirism from different avenues of belief and practice, Murdicus said. Vampires of all kinds from all over the U.S. want to support and protect the people who have become their family. Like family, they squabble and disagree, but the goal is always unity. And that is essentially it. I find some of it, it's like, I guess in the long run, it's just like any other spiritual tradition. It all just boils down to personal preference in a lot of ways. Because like when you're saying things like vampirism is uh how did he say it? An amalgamation of physical, mental, and spiritual qualities. It's almost like you might as well not even say that. Like you might as well just say it's yet another spiritual tradition. Like in some ways it sounds like, and this is part of the pageantry and me poking fun at them a little bit, is they're like, yeah, we're vampires and we are very spiritual and think about life and how we fit into it. And that's what makes us vampires. And it's like, okay. I don't understand, like
That's
you and
one
you
interpretation of it.
yeah, and also you and fucking everybody else. Like that's what humans are trying to do. So I don't understand why that makes you a vampire. So I quite frankly I find a lot of that like word salad and unnecessary, but I get it that they feel like they are a specific kind of person, like a category. I don't know if you'd use archetype there or not. I don't think so, but a kind of person that specifically feeds off of social situations and um and so all of your amalgamation of physical, mental, and spiritual attributes has to go in line with that self concept. But even still, it's a little bit overblown to me personally. And also, like, we all have to consume things. Our entire existence is vampiric in some ways. So also I fully respect what the vampires have going on there. And truly, to each their own. Live and let live. I like that you guys are living your best life. I don't honestly get what makes you a vampire though, because I am consuming all sorts of things, and I'm not drinking blood. So I guess, like I guess that makes sense. If you literally feel like you need to consume small bits of blood from your partner or whatever, I guess then you could consider yourself a vampire. But if you thrive on social situations and sexual encounters, like again, you and every other fucking person, I don't understand what we're talking about here. What do you think, Chris?
I'll have to agree with you on that. It's definitely a bit of a stretch to, I don't know if they're trying to be edgy or some shit, but
Definitely seems like that.
especially when they say like there's no, in their interpretation at least, there's no connection to the occult. I think inherently this vampirism and those traditions are connected to occult ideas and just hidden aspects of hidden traditions. So that even leads me to be further inclined that, like, well, again, what the fuck makes you a vampire if you're just I, I don't know. But I will say I for one am glad this person found their people and their tribe, because I can totally relate to the sentiment of feeling like a soul born to the wrong century. I think he said something like that in the
Yeah.
beginning.
Mhm.
Um, and just always sort of out of place. So, I'm at least grateful they feel included somewhere and they can relate to people. But yeah, that's a bit of a stretch. And yeah, in their explanation, uh everyone, yeah, we're vampires, dude. bro,
Right.
we're fucking vampires.
Yo, bro, I'm stoked, bro.
Fucking bro, I'm stoked, my guy. What else was I gonna say? Uh, shit, man.
Well,
Yeah, I guess this, they're kind of what they're referencing is the idea of energy vampires, and
mhm.
just again, it's just um I guess this all really comes down to how crucial interpretation or misinterpretation of any subject is, same with like the zombies. There's such, we covered all the mass misinterpretations of that, which
Mhm.
creates this image in our mind, or this creates a false concept that we, you know, connect our understanding to. But it's um again, it's just the misinterpretations have led to stuff such as these people considering themselves to be vampires, you
Yeah,
know, in
yeah.
a way.
And to round home plate a little bit, or like to thread some loose ends, I do definitely think that are forces of nature, at the very least, that we don't understand, autonomous things that are parasitic. I mean, even hungry ghosts, that you can consider in the more etheric energy vampire kind of situation. And I also do think that there are people who are like, maybe like the people who are more sociopathic, who really feed off of like negative energy in social situations and things, and like you could consider those energy vampires. So I just think that their general definitions were a bit too broad for me. But so that's basically it. I forgot, we should at least briefly mention this because it was interesting, but I'm gonna give the abbreviated version because, as fucking awesome as this has been, I'm mostly vampired out. But there was the New England vampire panic of the 19th century. It is known as the White Plague. It led to several cases of supposed vampirism in Rhode Island and eastern Connecticut. And relatives of deceased patients were often blamed for being drained of life. So there was talk of ethereal vampires and people coming back from the grave to drain their family members, like some of the folklore. And let's see, 1854, Jewett City, Connecticut, townspeople exhumed corpses suspected to be vampires. So there was a huge vampire scare that was in the vein of the witch hunts, and a part of this vampire scare was also in Salem. This researcher, in an article that I will post down there, Bell, I believe his name is Michael Bell. You'll find it down there. He has done a lot of research on covering this. It is still a little bit of an underdeveloped part of history. Like, we know that it happened, but we don't even know how many people were considered as part of this vampire lore who might have been killed while like actually murdered, like Salem witch style, because people thought they were vampires. But this guy has been documented about 80 exhumations reaching back as far as the late 1700s and as far west as Minnesota. But most are concentrated in the backwoods New England in the 1800s, startlingly later than the obvious local analog, the Salem, Massachusetts witch hunt of the 1690s. Okay, good clarification. Definitely an analog, but a little further down the road. They're still discovering more bodies that are related. Read an article that describes an exhumation, and they'll describe a similar thing that happened in a nearby town. And so it is an ongoing thing. And um, I'll go ahead and leave it at that because that is an interesting rabbit hole. It has a lot to do with tuberculosis, and we were talking about the bubonic plague earlier. So vampire lore, extremely fascinating. It definitely has to do with the shadow complex, but not only our inner demons, it has a lot to do with our earliest conceptions of medical ailments and diseases and bacteria and all these different things. So, fucking really interesting. And I don't have too much to say in summary. I think we've done a really good job cleaning house as we've moved along, but I'd really be interested in hearing any of your closing thoughts there, Chris.
Yeah, I definitely have a few. You mentioned even just right there a few times throughout the episode how some of these have been connected to stuff like tuberculosis outbreaks or bubonic plague, and it's that's interesting to me because there's this notion that some people consider parasites demonic entities on like the micro scale, um,
Right. Yeah.
which I
Interesting.
find that's really interesting to me. There's some good breakdowns I've come across, which also kind of related. Prince Philip, also one of the royal family, is notably quoted before he died as saying, if he had the chance, he would come back reincarnated as a deadly virus to help essentially culling the overpopulation. Um,
Wow. Yeah,
that's
just
kind of
another
dark.
reason to fuck the royal family. Fuck all
Yeah, dude.
the 0.01 percenters.
Yeah, it's fucking. They're definitely predators and have a parasitic nature to them. Um, and yeah, just a couple close up things I wanted to mention. Just
Yeah.
how we were talking in the beginning about being buried in like the mausoleums or the tombs, um and also how one of the characteristics of traveling vampires is they need to be with their home soil. And I don't know if that's it. I mean, obviously that's true in the lore, but the reason that soil and stone are important in like the whole burial process and traveling process is once again those are both elemental etheric insulators. And the reason that sunlight and running water are um, defense mechanisms against the vampire spirit is because both of those act as etheric erasers, as well as a compound called allicin, which is found in garlic and other plants in the onion family. Um, so that's the whole like
Damn. Fascinating.
connection to garlic right there. And then another thing I kept coming across was that something to distract or um, dissuade vampires from getting to you. People would put seeds around their house, like
Mm.
lay a bunch of small seeds, and it would. I guess the vampire would have to fucking count every one of them, and the reason for that is because there's high levels of like etheric energy in the seeds. You know, something the beginning process of life. So again, all this is just making me think of how much this is connected to the etheric and um, potentially some higher predatory spirit that we don't really fully understand, but
Yeah.
does seem to be present in uh, in our culture. And again, it's just the interpretation which you use with this. Like, I don't think it's too far off to make the analogy that the ruling class of America and the government especially has a very parasitic vampiric nature to it.
Yeah.
And oh yeah, oh yeah, the final thing I'll tie this up with because it connects to what we've been talking about and just with the zombies and the voodoo and the aspects. This all seems to come down to the idea of undead slaves. The zombie being more the the zombie is more of a slave to a human entity, which would almost be like you could see the vampire enslaving, using the concept of fucking zombie slaves. But
Right.
the vampire aspect seems to be more of a slave to some spiritual essence or being. But again, they're both it's
And
both the process of a human dying and then coming back to life and
and
repurpose.
vampires hypnotize people as well in that kind of zombie way.
Yep. Yeah. So it's interesting that all this correlation. Um, we're talking about monsters, but they seem so far apart, but they're really more closely linked than we would think.
That's a
And
great point.
final thing, we didn't give a shout out to the movie The Lost Boys, dude. One of the fucking vampire
Oh,
classics. And
oh man.
I
What is
grew up on that.
what is that crazy shirtless saxophone solo? Oh, he's like,
I
still
still believe.
believe.
I
Bow, bow,
still believe.
bow."
Dude, his fucking those purple fucking like skin tight spandex pants he's wearing, dude. He's just all oiled up like a fucking Thanksgiving turkey, ripping the sax. And I that dude, fucking Corey Feldman. I can't stand that guy, but he was all right in that movie. He
Yeah.
was a good child actor, but I find it funny that to me, he's in that movie, he's the character, he's one of the Frog Brothers. But to me, Corey Feldman actually looks like he could be a Frog Brother in real life. He's got that fucking face.
Yeah, yeah. Weird dude, Corey Feldman. Definitely peaked as a child actor. And that movie, The Lost Boys, it's goofy, but in like that a good kind of way. Like it's an 80s time capsule in a way that's still fun to revisit sometimes. Pretty fun movie.
Yes, a
Um,
time capsule is a great way to explain that, because
I still
it's very
believe.
hokey. Yeah, dude. I still believe.
All right,
But
that
yeah,
is a good note to end on. I'm so glad we brought up that stupid fucking but awesome saxophone situation in the Lost Boys. So salute to everybody. You know, don't judge your human vampire book by its cover, but keep your spiritual defenses up and be aware of the whatever fucking anomalous unseen forces. You know, and I guess that's it. Vampires, a winding historical rabbit hole, still very much alive in the modern day in ways that we might not expect. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. Next week, I'm not sure yet, but it's either going to be werewolves or some underground shit like the Paris catacombs, primarily. And I'm looking forward to it either way. So stick around. Enjoy your Black Hooded Halloween season. Get all those spooky monster fun activities out of your system. And yeah, fucking that's what these things are for, is embracing the shadow elements. So that we can purify that which is, nefarious, and make it more altruistic. And in a lot of ways, we can reconcile some of those damaged aspects of ourselves, some of those undernourished elements, and bring them to the light and make them easily accessible, a more well-rounded consciousness. And that's what it's all about. All right, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Chris, thanks as always for being a part of this with me. And we'll see you next week. Don't forget, this has been Black Hoodie Alchemy. I'm Anthony Tyler. Smoke weed and God bless.
This stupid little box ain't the truth.
Weapons of mass deception, clashes on our intersection, media propaganda blitz, leaders we follow hazardous, billboard swords, television antennas, blur your vision, wipe your eyes to see clear, empty-handed warriors release fear, choke out the sniper on the roof, wear a rubber for the piper in the groove, sharpen the dull and bone in your skull, vicious cycles of self-eliminating, semi-automatic mind murder, spirit tainted, we all bleed the same blood, the devil's serum painted to look just like us, talk just like us, walk just like us, monkey see, monkey do, gorillas, we been watching cools, stock in the news, anchor to your story, if it bleeds, it leads, that's the motto, I don't follow these, they give us, I just follow tomorrow, while you swallow today, these cocksuckers don't spit anyway, burn them like the pip I blaze, spit bars, lock you in cage, poverty pays, and the crime rate will raise, like heaven from this hell, a broken people, no status, no class, no cash, steal a brick from the witch's leg, so she can cast this spell, life's a bitch, the earth as well, live amongst the soulless where the zombies dwell, for freedom for your arm, leg, beg, this the Holocaust for your head.
Holocaust behind the soul, broadcast my control, we time travelers lost and can't find the road, trapped with no map, no third eye that got us home, immortal soul, bound in covenants of flesh, and no Holocaust behind the soul, broadcast my control, we time travelers lost and can't find the road, trapped with no map, no third eye that got us home, immortal soul, bound in covenants of flesh. To the dark side, it's park sides adjacent to hell. Out here the zombies pitch stones like they ringing a bell. Blast rocks, bunch of have-nots who live in the cell. Unlimited ways to meet your death, it's easy to tell. The reaper works here, the pay's great, raking the cheddar. Where random homicides evolve out of breaking and enter. There's no justice, no peace on this land, slaves to dollar signs. A world of lies, brain dead kids with hollow minds. Fluoridated water crystallized the pineal gland. Third eye blinded, turning to sand. There's no peace from the pain, asleep in the brain. Dead man walking with the sheep in the rain. And it seems every day is just more of the same. Another one bites the dust in this horrible game. What can be gained when all's lost? Through mental holocaust, freedom by any means, peace at all costs. Holocaust, they blind the soul, broadcast my control. We time travelers lost and can't find a road. Trapped with no